At eRoad, we believe fleet management doesn't have to be problematic. It should be effortless, connected, and future-ready for your heavy-duty operation. With a reliable, accurate technology solution, you can elevate your fleet's performance, improve productivity across your business, monitor events as they happen, and reduce costs and downtime. Get on the road to better fleet management and safer, more productive operations. Go beyond the basics and visit eroad.com today.
Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show on freight, but there is also Running on Ice, the newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Today, we welcome back the one and only Travis Ross, Senior Sales Engineer at eRoad. Welcome back, Travis.
Hi, Mary and friends. So good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you back, mostly because it's always a good conversation, and I'm curious if gravy is going to get brought up again this year or this time. But it's too early to tell. Let's see how the rest of the day goes. But today we're kind of getting into kind of the analysis that comes with all things that eRoad has, like you guys have all of the telematics and everything like that. So we're going to kind of get into the why, the behind that. So let's start with some of the reefer mode settings, something that you guys have spent a lot of time analyzing across fleets. Why is there still so much confusion around when to use auto start stop or continuous or anything else like that? What have you guys seen when fleets actually make the switch to the real world? Do you mind walking us through a specific example of that?
Yeah, no problem at all. Look, I've been looking at these type of things for about 10 years, and it started back when I was still with Golden State Foods. Love them. Big shout out to my friends at Golden State, and huge respect for the way they still carry food and do business today. Why is there still confusion around operating modes? Generally because operating modes, you have continuous and you have start stop for your reefer units. And it's often chosen out of either fear, because you just don't know which one to put it on, or that fear of trying to stay out of a liability or a lawsuit issue, right? It's a lot easier just to say, put that reefer unit on continuous and let the fans just keep going and going and going and keep that food safe. That's the easiest thing, but is it really the right thing? Like, it reminds me of when my mom used to say, just eat your peas, right? Well, why? Because I said so. But I'm allergic to peas. I made that up. I'm not allergic to peas. But it was just that just because I said so, there was not always logic behind it. And I'll speak from what I did, this many years ago back at Golden State again, because we didn't really have a mandate on how we were supposed to run the reefer units. And it's broadly known that when you put a reefer unit in start stop mode versus continuous, you're going to have 40% reduction in runtime, 40% reduction in fuel. So I'm going to give you some back of the napkin kind of math here. I've always wanted to say that. I thought it would sound cool. It really didn't sound as cool now that I've said it, but I've got some little math here I'm going to share with you. And this is what I personally experienced almost 10 years ago, and what we're seeing fleets experience now when they make the change. So if you look at, we're going to take the basics here. 10 hours per day, your fuel price is $3.55 a gallon. Let's say that your fleet size is 500. Mine was just 80 for one fleet, but overall it was over 1,000. And we're going to factor in a fleet cost or maintenance at 60 cents per hour for reefer operating hours. And I'm going to get to this really quickly. Your fuel savings per trailer, when you switch that operating mode from continuous to start stop, is just over $5,000 a year, just from that, just one trailer. So if you take the fleet fuel savings for 500 trailers, Mary, you ready for this? Big drum roll. It's $2,565,000 for a fleet of 500. Now that's just fuel, just switching from continuous to start stop. Then if you factor in the maintenance piece, that savings based on 60 cents per operating hour is $876 per trailer. That doesn't sound like a lot. And that doesn't even factor in all your filters and your belts and everything that you're doing because you're just running them like horses, right? But across a fleet of 500 for annually, that's $613,000, all rolled up into an annual savings per trailer of $6,007. And when you factor in fuel and maintenance for a fleet of 500, it's $4,205,000 just by a change in operating mode. It's massive, massive, Mary.
That is like that is no longer just a number that is a convenient amount of savings. That's like affecting the bottom line numbers.
Absolutely.
So I think, what about when shippers require it? Are the shippers just requiring it because they just want it to stay at a certain temperature and they don't want to fall into like a start stop stuck thing? Or like, because sometimes carriers are kind of hamstrung by those shipper requirements.
They are, yeah, absolutely. And there's valid reasons for running something on continuous. We typically see it in pharmaceuticals. You definitely must run them on, in pharma because they can't handle that variation. Now, typically, if your set point is say 34 degrees from the OEM, the delta is going to be 5 degrees. So in pharmaceuticals or say line haul, leafy greens, a single product trailer, you probably want to run that on continuous because it's not going to like that variation of when it kicks in. But anything else, if you're delivering multi-stop, packaged foods, frozen, mixed ambient with juices, all those things, right? Dual compartment, single compartment, doesn't matter really. Start stop is a very viable option. It's just that folks tend to just choose continuous because it just seems easier. What I've seen over the last 10 years is that there's just often not a lot of scientific studies to back it up that show choosing continuous is the right way to go. And that's what we're trying to lean into with partners and say, hey, let's look at this together and see whether or not that's the right thing to do. And let's do it carefully and slowly.
I think that's a really good point because it's making smarter decisions. It's saying, hey, we're doing this not necessarily just out of an abundance of caution or because we don't have those insights or anything like that. Like, there's been so much technological advancement that's happened specifically in the cold chain with trackers, temperature loggers, even the telematics that you guys have that can really paint a picture of exactly what's going on with that freight in just a more cohesive way. You can know exactly what temperature and humidity is happening inside of everything. And then also, what's going on the bigger picture of each trailer. And I do think that, that could be one of the areas that we could see some change in the coming years as the cold chain kind of really gets its hands around temperatures and all of that stuff, with the technology component added in.
Well, I agree. And one more piece, I promise not to get too wordy on you, but look, and a lot of folks are leaning into sustainability, right? So it's very difficult to say, I'm going to mandate that everything is run on continuous. Now, if there's a reason for it, there's a reason for it. But if there's not really a reason for it and you're advertising sustainability, it's a bit of a conflict. So let's at least just have the conversation and look at it because it definitely addresses scope 1 and scope 3 of those emissions directly.
1,000%. And I mean, I know sustainability is not necessarily like the new hotness anymore, but it's still something that's going to be a factor, kind of as we move through the future of the supply chain, if you will. But going back to something that is really kind of back at the forefront of what fleets are actually doing and what some of their, I don't want to say like organizational practices, but some of their like standard operating procedures. That's what I meant. And that's something that is pre-cooling because as we know, reefer units, they don't necessarily bring things down from temperature. They keep them at the temperature that they are. They're not like a freezer or a refrigerator that just you put something warm in there and it'll cool it down. they really just keep them at the existing temperature. When you kind of start digging into the data around how long reefers were running before loading, what were some of those things? Because sometimes drivers will sit there for like 2 or 3 hours before they get loaded, and then it'll take them 2 or 3 hours to get loaded. So what's kind of the 411 there?
Yeah, definitely. All right. I will fully admit that I did this as a transportation manager. This is just something I was aware when we pre-cooled, and I think we might have talked about this before, right? Like, it is very common across the industry that folks will go and switch on many trailers all at once during a specific block in the day. Like, they'll be dropped up to the dock for loading, and we'll switch on 10 to 15, sometimes even more, depending on the size of the operation. And often, if they're dual temp trailers, it may or may not be that the bulkhead's in place. So that's a double whammy. So if you happen to walk a line of trailers and look at the reefer units where they've been placed up at the loading dock, they've been switched on, and that bulkhead is not in place, you can look at the micro panel and see that compartment 1 and compartment 2 are always fluttering back and forth in the 30s or 40s, depending on your set point. It's never getting down to that true freezer temperature, because you essentially have like a snowstorm, or a winter, not snowstorm. You have a winter storm that you've created inside this unit, and often for hours and hours on end. So it's really important for customers to understand two things. How long am I really pre-cooling stuff? Like, am I doing it in excess? And we can help you with that. And how long are my trailers actually switched on before they're leaving for dispatch? So one more back of the napkin little thing here. I've got to use that twice. But let's just take that 1 gallon per day. Okay, $3.65 or 55 cents is I guess the average rate at the moment. We're just going to say that your trailer runs 365 days a year. A lot of broadline delivery companies do. So if you were just to cut 1 gallon per day out of your pre-cool durations for a fleet of 500, Mary, that's $647,847 annually across your fleet. And I keep using the fleet size of 500. I don't want the folks out there listening and say, hey, I only have 100. Maybe that doesn't mean no. Well, if you have a fleet of 100, that fuel savings is $129,575. I mean, that's new team members, that's a new trailer, that's so many things. So I have a catchy little phrase for this. It's 1 gallon per day equals millions you slay. That's pretty good, isn't it?
That is
My kids taught
really
me that one.
good. That is really
The
good.
math is easy and the change
Yeah.
is easy.
It really is, because if you think about it, if you're running more efficiently and you have all this extra data and analytics and everything at your fingertips, you never really have to worry about, again, we're talking not pharmaceuticals, not things that are very precise, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking about your average, let's say your average load of Pepsi or something like that, something that's not too crazy. So if that's the case, then we're sitting there and we're seeing, like, because if you combine the lack of, like, not pre-cooling as much and letting it sit there for hours, combined with not necessarily putting it on start stop versus continuous, you're looking at millions of dollars in savings for an average fleet size of 500 or less at 100.
Yeah, we've just broken out two different things: operating mode and pre-cool. If you want to just look at one, just look at one. I mean, it's fine. Just at least try to look at one. And that's what we're encouraging fleets to do. And we want to help you do that. Take it slow, take it easy, but it's just such a wonderful exercise to engage in, and the rewards are plentiful, for sure.
So I like that a lot of, excuse me, a lot of what you're talking about sounds like it's a big thing, right? Like, we're making all these changes, we're reducing our pre-cool times, we are, moving from start stop or from continuous to start stop. They sound kind of like, oh, we're going to have to rewrite our SOPs, we're going to have to redo things, we're going to have to retrain everybody. But it actually, like, it like at the high level, it seems like it'd be like a lot of changes to remind people and et cetera, et cetera. But it actually seems like it might be one of the more easier things to implement because you don't have to get all these different sign-offs on people. You don't have to have an integration team. It's just kind of like a, hey guys, see what happens if you just turn it on less.
Mary, most of the time, we do not enter a partnership with organizations thinking that SOPs need to be changed. Because as a transportation manager, as soon as you started dropping terms like that, I was ready for you to take a hike. I did not want to hear that. And I'll just give you a classic example. We recently engaged some months ago with an organization, ran some baseline data, and in that baseline data, and this is a well-run organization, right? But their pre-cool durations were averaging 86 minutes. Doesn't sound too bad, but 86 minutes. Overall, anywhere in the country should probably average around 45. It's kind of an unspoken thing. And we spent about 2 weeks on the ground just measuring what they did. Right? We did not come up with any kind of change in SOP. They did. And we just helped them measure it. And by the time that 2 weeks was over, Mary, their pre-cool durations dropped from 86 to 12 minutes. And I won't share their fleet size, but it's large. And they're putting those changes in place. It was easy to do. We just helped them measure it. It's not complicated.
Because if you can see, because even if it's like, okay, I don't know if this is going to work for me fully, and you have even we'll not use the 500 truck example. If you have 100 trucks, if you try it with 10, then you can see, okay, well, these 10 that I've put in this, what I'm calling a pilot program of just altering how we're using the reefer unit for freight we already have in a market where spot rates are fine ish. Like anything that you can do to kind of help increase that margin, even if it's just, something that takes off a couple cents a mile. Well, suddenly on 300 miles, that's like, couple that adds up over time. I'm not very fast at quick math, but that adds up very quickly, especially if you're doing it with just 10, because then you can say, okay, well, if these 10 saved me $200 in a week, then I can say, okay, well, what if I do the next 10? Does that mean that I'm going to do $400? And then you can kind of see the difference in savings. And I feel like that has to be really cool to like be able to see even in like a pilot program, those changes.
It is. I mean, it's a penny business, right? It's kind of like a grocery store. There, I think that I used to work for a grocery store way back in the day, but it is a penny business, and especially now, right? Things are tight. Organizations aren't wanting to spend money, so it is now time to run very lean. And it's so easy to start a little test. I mean, depending on the fleet size, start with one, change that operating mode, watch that pre-cool behavior, move to three. We think that you'll get bored after one or three and want to move it up. Oh, and look, by the way, we would love for organizations to utilize us to bring that telematics data in, but doesn't have to be. We will help you read that reefer data no matter who your telematics provider is. We're gifted at understanding what the reefers are telling you and what to do with that data.
But also, shameless plug, if you don't have a reefer or a telematics provider, I know a guy. Shameless plug. If you're like,
Thanks for
I'm
that.
curious about this whole reefer telematics,
Yeah,
Travis also helped you
absolutely.
there.
Definitely.
But we've talked about that before. You can go find our old episodes for those.
That's right.
Um, so that being said, with everything that you've kind of learned from the field, from reefer mode strategies, temperature management. Wow, the English language is really working for me today. Operational changes. What advice would you give to cold chain fleets trying to run leaner without actually risking their cargo?
Yeah, it's scary. All the things that we're talking about. You know, if you have folks in FSQA and they're coming into this conversation, there's a lot of trigger words that we're using. Load loss. We haven't said that, but they're thinking it. I would say at least try. We have a way of overlaying route structures on continuous, start, stop, specific time, whatever test you want to run. For example, if you wanted to take a specific route to two particular assets in your organization, one's run in continuous, one is run on start, stop, and we can overlay that into our platform that gives you the simulated internal product temperature. We can do that for you anytime. We can do that historically. The test can be done so carefully and slow and easy. But, really, it's it's not just that giving you a comfort level that your food's going to be okay. It's just really just try to gain an understanding of how long those reefers are running on the yard. How long are you pre-cooling them? Get that first, I would say, and then let us make you comfortable that the food's going to be okay. And I'll give you a classic example. Like we partnered with an organization recently that was concerned about this, and we were able to show some data to say, look, here's a route that was running start stop in a particular city. I like to not give names and such, but in a particular city recently where the high was 100 degrees, the low was 84. The route had 15 stops. It was run in start stop mode, and the temperature compliance was absolutely perfect. And we can produce that data over and over and over and over again. So I would just encourage folks to consider, hey, before blaming the operating mode, is it something else in the operation that might be causing a problem? Is it a bad door seal? Drivers are important, so I'm not trying to, but is it driver behavior? Is it side door behavior? What is it before just saying, hey, we're going to run those things on continuous and hit the button and not even thinking about it? Because what we found is you might think that everything's running on continuous, but a lot of folks kind of lose sight on what's happening once that leaves the yard. So we just encourage you to try.
I like that because also, what do you have to lose if you try? I mean, obviously, with compliance sign off and everything like that. We're not trying to anger the compliance gods today because their job is important and they keep things running. However, if you just try on like one or two loads, whether like because everyone knows they've got the good driver and like the one that's like, yeah, sure, I'll try it. Why not? Because they're still gonna babysit a load and they're still gonna you got the good driver, So you get the good driver, you get a pretty innocent enough load, and that it's not really there won't be that much project degradation if it falls just slightly out of temperature, but you do a relatively harmless product and just try, because the worst that happens is that nothing changes, and you realize, okay, well, this isn't the commodity to do this on, or this isn't that. All you can do is try, and then you're still in the same spot that you were, or maybe you're in a better spot.
That's right. And look, there's other things we can do, right, to make it even less risk. We can draw that delta into 2 or 3 rather than 5. We can really tighten that up. So mitigate those risks as much as possible. We just want you to try.
Exactly. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
There you go.
All right, Travis. That being said, we are coming towards the end of our time together today. But that being said, we've asked you quite a few questions on this show. So this time I think it's time to get a little more philosophical about it today. Really get the harder hitting questions. And today it's going to be, would you rather go 100 years in the past or 100 years in the future?
Oh, that's easy. Past
Yeah.
all day long. I
Yeah.
can't be the main character going 100 years into the future, right? So here's my that sounded really conceited. My kids would say that was terrible. Dad, you can't claim that you're the main character. Somebody else has to say that you're the main. Anyway, I'm learning all my Gen Z stuff. So no,
Mm-hmm.
I think if I could go into the past, there's one specific thing that I would do. So I'm a Swiftie. I
Mm-hmm.
would take all of the song lyrics, go back 100 years, and I would maybe say that I wrote some of those and you know put those out. I'm not sure that the teenage angst would hit back then, but I think some of them would, and I'd be legend. So
you would be the reason for the teardrops on somebody's guitar.
yeah. Oh my God. Yes. Bingo.
I absolutely love this. I absolutely love that. Um, okay. I mean, that's as good a reason as any to go back in the past. So that being said, if anyone maybe has questions on how they can, or maybe they have a time machine to complete your dreams, or if someone has questions about where to start with Reefer telematics or, trying new things, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah. Can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Travis Ross. Can email me at travis.ross@eroad.com or hit me up on the DM. Text me 803-608-3728. I love to talk shop about this stuff, so I hope to hear from some folks. Thanks, Mary.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Travis.
Thank you.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on FreightWaves TV, YouTube, or anywhere else you get your podcasts like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.